So in this video, I'd like to highlight what you actually want to keep in mind as you are interviewing for a position. Some points, some tips, and some things that you want to prepare before you go into the particular interview. Remember, when you are interviewing for a position, you are also looking to see if you are a good fit for this corporation. You don't want to go to work and be unhappy every day. So you want to be prepared to ask questions at the end of the interview and be aware of your surroundings to be sure that you are interested in this position as much as they are interested in you. So let's look at some skills for you to keep in mind as you are going through the interviewing process. Your textbook looks at the most basic skills for you. I'm sure many of you know these already, but however, it's always good to be reminded. Sometimes the interview takes place before you actually go into the office to be interviewed. I know at a major corporation here, the HR person looks out the window as the interviewee is coming into the company to see, what that person is doing, how he or she is interacting. The human resources person may even ask the administrative assistant, how did he or she interact with you or interact with others in the office, to get a good feel of whether or not this interviewee would be a good fit for this particular job. Dress appropriately. Always dress on the side of being more conservative. There's a rule of thumb saying dress for the position that you want beyond. For instance, if you're looking for an assistant manager's position, you want to be dressing for that manager or CEO position. Very conservative. Keep in mind too, think about the organization in which you are interviewing for. Are you interviewing for an art gallery or for a bank? Obviously, banks, healthcare are very conservative because you're dealing with people's money and health, compared to more a creative side of an art gallery or maybe a graphic artist. So you can keep that in mind as far as how you are dressed. And we say dress appropriately because we know how much do we understand through nonverbal communication. It could be up to 90%. So that's one of the first things that an interviewer will look at as far as how you are dressed. Think about all the senses involved as far as cologne, perfume, makeup, earrings, those kinds of things as well. Communicate information to that interviewer. Look at your social media image. Is there something on there that you do not want this interviewer to see? And anyway, it's just a good rule of thumb, good practice to always be conservative as far as what you are posting on social media. And then lastly, make the interviewer feel comfortable. Most of the times interviewers, human resources people are trained to interview, but many times they may be just as nervous as you are, or not feeling a little uneasy. So it's good to make that connectiveness with that particular interviewer. Okay, so now with technology, we are seeing, and more employers are requesting video resumes. So this is something that you can easily put together, obviously, now that you're an online student and you've used Screencast-O-Matic. If you want to put together a brief video resume to send along with your paper resume, that works as well. Some things to keep in mind as you're putting together this video resume. Pretty much the same as if you're in an interview. You want to keep it brief. You don't want to be long-winded. You want to just have your key points, kind of like when you deliver a speech, right? You have your goal and then you have your 3 key points. So it's the same thing with your video resume, who you are, and then some 3 key points, quickly describing a little bit about yourself and your skills and your training. Dress appropriately, again, goes along the same thing that I mentioned earlier. Art gallery, a little more creative compared to a more conservative venue, but you always want to, if you're always concerned, is this look okay? Do I look like I'm going out on a Saturday night or going on a job interview? Always go for the job interview. This is not the time to be dressing flashy or to be wearing something that's a little bit unusual. Adapt to your audience, the position, the organization, and then lastly, show your personality through your video. So adapting to the organization, again, talking, if it's with an art gallery, talking a little bit about that. If it's with a bank, talking a little bit about, bringing in those descriptive words, language for that particular audience. So that's a video resume and something that you can easily put together to complement your paper resume. So the process of the actual interview. And as we know, we have our canned questions that we all should practice before we go to an interview. Can you tell me about yourself? This is that 2-minute first question that you need to kind of have a synopsis of who you are. It's kind of putting your resume in a verbal form. And you want to practice that particular commercial, if you want to say, about who you are and, how you got to the particular position of where you're at now. And guys, remember too, you keep personal life out of it. You don't talk about your kids or you don't talk about your spouses. This is all about your training, your education. Perhaps you want to throw in what you like to do, hobbies, extracurricular activities. But as far as personal life, that should be off the board. Why do you want this job? Strengths and weaknesses. And we know our weaknesses. We want to kind of adapt them to the position. Maybe somehow make it more of a strength. You want to focus on those strengths. Again, those good adapted skills, transferable skills are your strengths. And then, obviously you have weaknesses. We all have weaknesses, and how to verbalize those particular weaknesses. So here are some typical questions as far as that you will hear during an interview. A lot of times now we're seeing more scenario type questions or behavioral type questions, and you'll see that in your assignment for interviewing on monster.com or on monster.com, where I'm asking you to ask these particular questions because during interviews they are now looking to see how you react in a particular situation. If you're an assistant manager, how would you react in this particular situation? And it shows many different types of interactive communication skills among those particular groups. You can tell a story, provide quantity and quality. Okay, so you could probably tell a story, make it a little more illustrative, emphasize the results. This is not the time to be shy. Don't be modest during an interview. Now, don't be overly arrogant, but you know what? If you have done something and you've done it well, let them know, because that's very important. That might put you over the edge compared to another candidate. And obviously, lastly, connect your results with that particular organization's needs. So after the interviewer has interviewed you, next you will have prepared questions for this particular person. And it's always good to have a few prepared questions because let's say some of them were answered during the interview. Nothing wrong with having them written down, having them in your folder, because remember, you're bringing your portfolio, you're sharing that, you're bringing extra copies of your resume, but having these particular questions written down. And here are some examples of particular questions that you may want to ask. Obviously, they could be very personal or unique to you and to this position, but here are some general questions that you can reference. Okay, so next, how to close the interview. Obviously, you want to thank them for their time. Whether it's a committee or an individual person, you want to thank each individual for their time and for interviewing you. You want to say that you are very interested in the position. If you are very interested in the position, maybe after the interview you find, I don't want to work for this place. But if you are, put that out there. Say, I am very interested in this position. Think about some key elements of the research that you did for this particular organization or position of what they do. Again, that assistant manager at Ross, know what their sales quota is, know what customers they serve. This is all research you have done on the internet or in other journals to find out more about that particular company that will impress them and say that you want the job. Also, I'd like to add, at the end of an interview, I always like to say when you're shaking hands with each individual person, you want, again, sell yourself. Tell them 3 good reasons why you should have that position. Okay, think about those adapted skills, those transferable skills, or your job-related skills, and just say that, thank you again for your time. I know with my detailed-oriented skills, my team-playing attitude, and my skills as an accountant, I can benefit and I could work with you and everyone in this company. Please consider me for this position. So again, there's 3 key points, whatever they may be. Reiterate them as you're shaking hands with the folks that interviewed you. The next part of the interview process is following up. And it's very important that you express thanks to the interviewers. Now, there's different situations call for different ways of expressing thanks. Hey, you know what? Let's say they're making their decision tomorrow or within the next couple of days. You might want to send an email and thank each individual person. You can find out the person's names in which you interviewed and their position titles through either researching on the internet or even asking that administrative assistant as you're leaving, or perhaps, and I know business cards are on the way out, but you can obtain a business card, and that way you know how to email and thank each individual person. A handwritten letter or a note is, and they give you an example here of how to write this handwritten note and to highlight your experience and again, your interest in the position. This goes a little bit further than an email because it's the time involved of handwriting the note. But again, it depends on the situation in which you interviewed and when they are making that decision. Here are some other obvious highlights of information for you as far as, be friendly, don't forget your signature, be prompt. Here's the option of emailing or handwritten. Anytime in an interview, if you're saying, should I be more formal or less formal? More formal. Conservative, more formal in any type of, in an interview or a position when you're asking that question. Texting is not appropriate at this point. Again, though, you can decide on the situation. Most of the time, texting is not appropriate, but let's say it's your friend and you've had an interview over lunch and you text all the time. That could be a time when it would work. But for the most part, you keep it more on the business aspect, business scale, as far as thanking that individual. And lastly, follow through. And sometimes human resource people do this on purpose, or interviewers. They say, well, can you follow up and send me this particular written piece that you accomplished? Maybe you discussed it during the interview. Or can you follow up and send me A, B, and C? Okay, so what they're looking for is to see if you are detailed oriented and then you do follow up with what they request you to do. A lot of times it's good to have that because, again, you could reiterate your interests and why you are the best person for this position if there is any type of follow-up. So just to reiterate in a nutshell what we just talked about, first we looked at the process of an interview, of having questions prepared, practice beforehand, to think about yourself during the interview, your nonverbal cues, how you're dressed, how to close the interview as far as thanking folks who interviewed you, having prepared questions so that you could ask them questions at the end of the interview and to see if you're a good fit. And then lastly, how to follow up on a particular interview with a card or an email of thanks, and if you need to follow up with any information. So that was the process of the interview. Please watch the next very, very short video on how to relieve any anxiety that you may be having before the interview process.